Hello, it is I, Dr. Brian Lorgon 111, and welcome back to my series on designing a tracker for Zelda 1 Randomizer. Last time we went over what the Legend of Zelda was and what Zelda 1 Randomizer is, and also introduced the common existing tracker for Z1R, namely Z-Helper, which I have on the screen today. In today's video, we are going to go over various flaws in Z-Helper's design and implementation. And before we talk about that, I'm going to call things flaws or past judgment in order to kind of validate that. I think we need to step back and ask ourselves, what does a tracker do and who is the user, who is the audience who is going to be using this piece of software, the tracker, and what do they need out of it? And I think it's important to talk about that because it's not immediately obvious that there are multiple audiences for this tool. The most obvious audience for the tool, the person who's going to be using it directly, is the person who is playing Z1R. While they are streaming, they want to keep some notes, and so they're going to be using the tracker. And so they are the primary audience of the tool. And whether they are just kind of playing the game casually or racing, they have a lot of the same kind of desires and constraints. Basically, it's a tool that they are going to use to supplement their own memory. There is way too much stuff to remember all of the details about what locations are where on the map, what the different map shapes look like, and which items you currently have picked up versus which you still have to do and which dungeons you still have to finish. And so that is the purpose of the tracker. From the point of view of the person who's actually playing the seed. In addition to just the person who's playing Z1R and using the tracker directly, there are a couple of other audiences that might not be as obvious, however. The first one is stream viewers. It's often the case that when people play video games, they stream them to an audience so that other people can watch and follow along and enjoy. And so it is often the case that you will see Z-Helper or any tracker for any particular randomizer on the screen if you're watching someone play a randomizer on Twitch. And as a stream viewer, you have kind of a different set of information, assumptions, constraints or whatever that are kind of going into your own use and consumption of the information that's coming out of the tool. It's usually the case that stream viewers probably don't know as much about the game as the person who's actually playing it. It's not always the case, but it's often the case that the audience knows less about what's going on, as well as knows less about the tracker itself and its layout and how it looks on the screen and how it's used. It's also the case typically that stream viewers are either not paying as much attention as the person who's actually playing the game, or perhaps just don't have all the information, because if a stream for playing Z1R lasts 2 hours long, someone who shows up to view the stream might show up an hour in, and so they don't know what happened during the first hour necessarily, and so they can't go back and rely on their memory of what they've already seen of the seed in order to make certain inferences. And so stream viewers kind of have their own set of needs due to not knowing as much about the game or the tracker tool, as well as possibly not having the information from the entire run because they arrived late. And finally, a third audience for a tracker tool is for people who are new learners of a particular randomizer. If you are trying to play a randomizer for the first time or the second time, it can be very difficult because even if you know the original game very well, it's still the case that there's so much new stuff and so much that's randomized that you have a hard time piecing together what it is you need to do and what it is that it's possible for you to do right now, and how to think about any kind of long-term strategy. And so a third possible role for a tracker is basically to provide the player some steering and some information and some ability to learn what it is they need to do in order to actually complete a game of a particular randomizer. And so I've listed those three audiences, those three consumers of information coming out of the tracker in what I think is priority order. Definitely priority one is the person who's actually playing the game. The person who's playing Zelda 1 Randomizer needs to interact with and take advantage of the tool in order to kind of augment their own memory of what's going on. They're the most important audience. Priority 2 are stream viewers. It's often the case that people will be playing these games in order to stream them to an audience, and so trying to make affordances for the audience to catch them up on stuff that's happened in the past, or to make it easy for them to discover and understand the information that's currently on the screen, even if they don't have a memory of the whole stream, is important for a tracker to try to serve. And then thirdly, as kind of priority 3, is new learners of Zelda 1 Randomizer, or whatever randomizer that you're playing. If the tracker can provide various bits of steering and scaffolding and learning affordances to make it easier for someone to learn the tool, then that can make the tool better. And so that's the framework that I'm going to use in order to make judgments about whether a tracker is doing its job well or poorly in order to serve those various audiences. Having said that, let me make a couple of disclaimers because I'm going to be picking apart Z-Helper pretty hard in this video. One is there are good features of Z-Helper. I'm not talking about them because our goal is to pick apart the problems so that we can have that in mind when we want to design a better tool. So that's one thing. And the other thing is I'm trying to look at Z-Helper from the criteria of being a tool to serve those audiences. I don't know that Z-Helper was designed with all or some of those audiences in mind. I've never talked to the person who made this tool before, and so it may be unfair to apply the criteria that I've previously listed to the tool, but I want to make a tool that's going to serve those audiences, and so those are the criteria that I'm going to be used for kind of passing judgment on different features today. So that having said, let's get into the various flaws of Z-Helper. Okay, so let's start up a new session of the tool and talk about a very trivial but important flaw, in my opinion. Let's suppose that you have found Dungeon 6, and you go wander around Dungeon 6, and you find its items, and in Dungeon 6, there's a Triforce and 2 different key items, and so let's imagine that it was, you got the Triforce and the book and the wand. So I'm going to mark the Triforce, and I'm going to mark the book, and I'm going to mark the wand, wherever it is in the list. There it is. And so that's how you can mark the 3 different items. And if you were someone who was racing Zelda 1 Randomizer, as people often do, it's a popular game. It's a lot of fun. And typically every day there are multiple races where people will race the same seed against one another to see who complete things fast enough. But yeah, if you're racing, you probably just lost the race because we have mismarked things in our tracker. There are 8 different dungeons, and each dungeon has a column with its key items. And most of the dungeons only contain 2 key items, but some of them contain 3. But Dungeon 1, you would put its key item, like the bow, and the boomerang, and a heart container, for example, if it was vanilla, in Dungeon 1's column. That's over here and over here. And then same thing for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I accidentally put the wand, well, I didn't accidentally do it, I'm doing it to demonstrate. I put the wand in the 7th column, despite the fact that I got it out of Dungeon 6. And there's no numbering on the columns over here. It's very easy to accidentally put the final item from one of these middle dungeons into the wrong column because there is no numbering and because it's not one column. And this is an important problem because if you mismark the tracker like this, it means later when you're coming back and trying to find the final item, if you've done Dungeon 6 and Dungeon 7 and you know where these 2 dungeons are, and you come back later and you say, oh, I'm missing an item from Dungeon 6, and you go back into Dungeon 6, you'll be wasting your time because you got the item out of Dungeon 6, and the place that you need to look is Dungeon 7, and that can easily cost you many minutes, which would lose you a race. And this is a common problem. I have watched many people make this exact error, and this is not a problem that is related to people who are new to the game or people who are using the tracker. This is a very popular game. Like there's a tournament going on right now that's has like a cash money prize for like the people who come in first or second place or whatever. Um, there are people who play this game pretty much every night of the week and who are very, very good at it. And I have seen those people make this mistake of placing things in the wrong column, not once, but twice in the same race. Um, and it's such a simple problem because these things are not lined up in a column. Instead, half of the column is on the left over here, and the other half of the items for a particular dungeon are on the right over here, and there's not a numbering system. You could either put a second numbering system on the right over the top, or you could just take this whole piece of these items and move it below this piece so that everything is lined up in one column, and it would solve the problem. It's that easy. So why is it not done that way? I don't know. I've been speculating about reasons, and I was thinking, well, the kind of like the whole Z helper window is a particular size, and so maybe they didn't want to make it too tall or too short. But the size that the Z helper window is not like 4:3 or 16:9. It's not like it was trying to fit into a particular aspect ratio. And furthermore, I talked about it previously that Z helper allows you to do online collaborative multiplayer stuff. And so down here at the bottom, you see my name, and then there's slots for like 7 other people's names. And they could all be making changes to the tracker. It could show where they are at a given point in time, which is nice if you're doing cooperative multiplayer stuff. I think 99 or more % of the time that people use Z Helper, they're using it in single player mode. And yet this whole bottom section is always here with multiplayer. And so it's kind of just 15% of the screen real estate inside the tool is being wasted anyway. So if you just like cut this out and move the whole thing down and had these item things be underneath the Triforces and first key items kind of in the columns, then you would no longer make the mistake that I just made of accidentally putting an item from Dungeon 6 in the slot for Dungeon 7 because you failed to line up the columns correctly. So this this one design flaw alone would have been sufficient motivation for me to want to make my own tracker to play Zelda 1 Randomizer, because Zelda 1 Randomizer is fun, and I find this infuriating. But yeah, there's a number of flaws that we'll continue to go over. But yeah, that has been my main motivation for creating my own Zelda 1 Randomizer tracker tool. It's just that I want one that doesn't make me angry every time I use it. Okay, so there's one very trivial thing that you could change in order to make the tracker a whole lot better. While we're talking about it, kind of a minor thing is, I mentioned this briefly in the previous video, in what's called First Quest dungeons. There's First Quest and Second Quest in The Legend of Zelda, and in the Randomizer for reasons. And they have various vagaries, but in First Quest dungeons, it's the case that Dungeon 1 has 3 key items, such as the bow, boomerang, and heart container that we see here. In Second Quest, instead of Dungeon 1 having 3 key items, it's Dungeon 4 that has 3 key items. So for example, in Dungeon 4, I might find the silver arrow and the white sword and a heart container in Second Quest dungeons, and Dungeon 1 would only have 2 key items, and so this box right here would be unused in First Quest, or in Second Quest, and this box would be unused in First Quest. And so it's nice that the tracker has that affordance. It has the extra box in Dungeon 1 or in Dungeon 4, and you just choose to use one or the other, and they're actually labeled. Caret 1 here and Caret 2 here is for First Quest and for Second Quest. But if you don't know that information, either because you're new to the randomizer or new to the tool, then this, like the extra box, like basically for the first year that I was using Z Helper, I only played First Quest dungeons. And so I knew about this, and I didn't know why there was the box here on number 4, and I didn't know what these Caret 1 and Caret 2 things were. And admittedly, I never read the documentation for Z Tracker, but I've looked in the for Z Helper, but I've looked in the documentation for Z Helper, and it does not describe this at all. So the only way that you find out what these things mean and why you use them is from talking to other people who have used the tool. So yeah, it's not a bad thing that the tool has it, but it's hard to discover the meaning of it. And so helping out those who are new would be an improvement in that regard. All right, the next thing, the item boxes themselves. It's typically the case that you will mark items when you actually obtain those items. However, it's also the case that, as I have mentioned briefly before, there's a variety of NPCs who do a number of different things. One of the NPCs offers hints, and in the randomizer, the hints tell you about sometimes what items are going to be in which dungeons. And so you might get a hint at some point from an NPC on the overworld that says, level 5 has the red ring, although it won't be in so many words because the hints are kind of given in kind of a cryptic fashion. And so basically here's the red ring, and so I can put it in column 5 over here to say that level 5 has the red ring when I get that hint, and that will allow me to know that I need to go after that item because the red ring is one of the most valuable items in terms of combat. It's basically the top armor upgrade that makes it so you take only a quarter as much damage as you do at the beginning of the game. So it's a very valuable item, and so that would be a very valuable hint if I were to get that during the middle of a game. And so I would want to mark on my tracker where the location of the red ring is. However, most of the items that you're typically marking are items that you've gotten, and this is an item that you have not gotten. If you were the person who is running the seed, you have all of the context of having played the seed in your memory for the most part. And so marking that the item has been gotten versus has not yet been gotten is typically not important because you know it in your head. However, if you are a viewer of the stream and you come along, you might think that the player has already obtained the red ring, when in fact, because it's marked here on the tracker, when in fact the player hasn't obtained the red ring yet, they just obtained a hint about it. And so it would be nice if there's a way to distinguish between items the player has versus items that the player simply knows about their locations but does not yet have. Another good example of that is the coast item that you can only get with the ladder that gets marked here. If the coast item were the red candle, for example, I might have this box filled with a red candle simply because I've been to the coast and seen that there's a red candle there, but have not yet been able to obtain it because I don't yet have the ladder, versus I've actually been to the coast with the ladder and picked up the item. And so if you're a stream viewer or someone who doesn't have a memory, wasn't paying attention the entire seed, you might not know if the player has it. And Z Helper does have a way to kind of mark this information. If you middle click on a box, it'll toggle a highlight around the box. For some reason, the ladder item and armless item and white sword item are different colors. And so the middle click toggles a different color box around them. I don't know why that is. But we could, for example, middle click these items to highlight them with the box outline in order to say, I don't have this item yet. It's one that I need to go after. You could do that, or sometimes I see people do the opposite, which is when, oops, I clicked the wrong thing here. When they get an item, they might middle click them, and if they haven't gotten the item, then they might leave them ungotten. And so the display might look like this. Actually, I'm not sure if I've seen people do it this way necessarily. And I also see people middle click highlight boxes that they haven't gotten as kind of like their own memory aid to say, there was something else in this dungeon that I didn't go after and was kind of planning on leaving behind. So basically the Z Helper tool does give an affordance for kind of like state of a particular item that you can mark one way or another, but the intentional reasoning behind those markings is left ambiguous, and different runners use them in different ways. And so as a result, if you were a viewer of different people's streams, you don't have the information, even if the streamer is using middle click marks up here in order to communicate if they have or haven't gotten an item. Different people use the marks differently, and so if you're watching different streams, you still don't necessarily know what items the current player currently has based on what's on the screen. So providing some uniform way of marking up the display and making it obvious to the viewers what that display means is a way that we could improve the item boxes in the tracker tool. Let's talk about a couple more issues up in the top section of the tracker before we get down to talking about issues with the overworld map. I talked before about how you might get a helpful hint that says that level 5 contains the red ring. In addition to helpful hints about which items are in which dungeons, you can also get helpful hints about locations of dungeons. And so we might get information that, for example, level 5 is in the Dead Woods. And so there's an HH tab for helpful hints that you can mark inside Z Tracker. And so if you get any of those helpful hints that says level 5 is in the Dead Woods, you can mark it on that hint tracker. And so it's good that you're able to record those, and the act of recording them also often just kind of implicitly helps you remember a little bit later on. The Dead Woods, by the way, is, if I click area on Z Helper here in the tracker, it highlights in different colors the different areas of the map. The area that's kind of brown over here is the area that's known as the Dead Woods. I think there's like 10 different zones that the randomizer gives hints for. And so the NPC's hints are basically information about which of these zones you might find something in. And so one of these squares would end up being where we would find level 5. And the ideal reminder has both a message and a trigger. The message being the content, in this case, the information that level 5 is in the Dead Woods, and the trigger being some kind of reminder, something that will catch your attention at the appropriate time when you need to use it. And so the message is captured that level 5 is in the Dead Woods. The trigger, however, to the extent that there's any reminder or whatever, like it's off screen typically, like you're wandering around the overworld map and there's nothing that says that you have information about where level 5 is unless you go back over to this tab and reread it. So you kind of have to remember that you have a hint for the next time, you know, a few minutes later when you're walking down in the Dead Woods area, to remember that you had a hint perhaps to go looking for Dungeon 5, which is going to be a very important dungeon because it has the red ring. So ideally it would be nice if the hint were not tucked away in some other tab. It would be nice if there was some kind of display that would help remind you when you're doing other things. One other thing in the top portion of the tracker, there's a heart over here above the ladder. There's these 4 hearts. There are 4 places on the overworld that we often call the take any squares, which are marked on the tracker, if I can find the icon, as a take any spot. And basically you can take a heart container or a potion, or sometimes in Randomizer you can take a candle. And right now there's the icon. A heart or a potion are the typical choices that people might make. And there's 4 of those that will be located on the overworld map. And so these 4 hearts are for marking if you got those 4 and chose the heart. If you didn't choose the heart, you could instead X them out if you chose to take the potion instead. And as a result, be able to track how many of the take any's you've encountered and how many of the hearts you've picked up versus other things. So those hearts kind of make sense. There's a heart over here above the ladder spot that I don't know why it's here. And I've seen some people ask about it, and different people have given different responses to what they use it for or why it might be there. Also, you can middle click the heart to turn it into 2 hearts as an icon, which I've never seen anybody do, and I don't know if people are even aware that that's a thing, but I discovered it reading the documentation today when I was making this video. I don't know why you would choose to do that or what purpose it's supposed to serve, so I don't know why that's there. There's a few bits of the Z Helper interface that I don't quite understand even after reading the documentation. But these are kind of more nitpicky bits. Let's move on. So let's talk about the overworld map and navigating around it. When I was new to Z1R, I found it very difficult to get around on the map. And part of the reason is the way that Z Helper displays it. It has this nice coordinate system so that you can refer to each screen as, for example, this one is B13, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and 1 through 16 is a convenient labeling system for the different overworld screens. And I could see, for example, if you were playing cooperative multiplayer, how that's very valuable if you want to tell someone, hey, I found something at F12, then being able to immediately look at and name the name of the screen is pretty valuable. However, if you're playing single player, that is typically not as important. And furthermore, the way the coordinates are displayed kind of breaks up the map so that it's difficult to see how various bits connect. And so there is an option in Z-Helper, and let me go pull it up. Options, chords, decimal, hexadecimal. How do I turn them off? Show chords and player indicators. Here we go. I click that and turn that off. So if I do that, then the map gets compressed like this. And I find this map a whole lot easier to read. All of a sudden, I can see the actual coastline and how it's kind of connected over here, and just kind of see all of the kind of vertical connections between map squares. And so that already has improved my ability to navigate this map. And so it took me a little while to find that feature was there. And yeah, it would be nice if that feature were not hidden away so far, or if when you were displaying the coordinates, it didn't break up the map as much as it does in order to be able to kind of see the overall structure of the map. But I'm going to leave it this way for the rest of the video as we talk about some other things. So next up, as you are marking up the map and finding various locations, sometimes the locations will be stuff that you don't care about, or there might not be an entrance there, and so typically you might mark those as an X. There's a lot of different things that you might end up marking, such as potion shops, etc., etc. And so I'm just going to mark a few of them here kind of willy-nilly. As you do so, it gives you the information about tiles that you have already been to and marked up, but it destroys some of the ability to navigate the map and see where you are. And so the fact that the icons take up the whole tiles and kind of overwrite the map, I was finding problematic. Z-Helper does have a way to deal with that. There's this TR thing, which is for transparency. And so if I click it, it can change the icons to being 50% transparent, so I can still see some of the map behind them. Or I could even click it again, and the icons become 90% transparent and only 10% visible, at which point I pretty much can only see the map. Like, I can't really read any of the icons that are currently there. But there's 3 different transparency options. And so I appreciate that the affordance is there. And at some point when I was trying to use Z-Helper, I think I had things on 50% transparency, so I could kind of see where I was in the map while I was passing through places that I had already marked. But still, I find this difficult to read, and so we can imagine an improved way to both carry the information about the different locations that you have marked up while preserving some of the visibility of the structure of the map in order to help you navigate around. Another interesting aspect of Z-Helper's presentation of the map is the colors. You'll notice that a lot of the tiles have kind of a red haze over them. These are overworld locations where there cannot be an entrance in the particular overworld quest you're playing. We're currently marked as first quest. There's also second quest. When I click that, you'll see that the red hazes kind of bounce around between which tiles are marked as could have a location versus don't have a location. Second quest has more locations, and so there's fewer tiles that are marked red, but they do switch positions a bit. This is just kind of a feature of the randomizer. You'll also notice in second quest something that wasn't as easy to see in first quest, which is some of the tiles have a blue haze on them. The tiles with the blue haze are basically the locations where one can use the recorder to possibly open up a location. And so the recorder is one of the key items that you can find in a dungeon, and when you blow in it, use it as an item in game, it plays a little whistle tune, and sometimes that will open up secret entrances, and so these blue tiles mark where those secret entrances are going to be. I found this coloring system to not necessarily be helpful to me when I was trying to mark up the map at first in order for being able to locate what are the locations that I have done and what are the locations that I have yet to find. And so I'm just going to mark off like a bunch of map squares along the way. But I found it hard just kind of glancing through here necessarily to be able to see at a glance which screens I still needed to do. and which screens I didn't. And so, for example, this is a screen that I left behind that I didn't do, and this is a screen that I left behind that I didn't mark, and these ones up here are, but I find they don't jump out at me. This one is, despite being a blue haze, because it means I haven't played the recorder there yet. And so in general, I find that the choice of colors, as well as just kind of the way that things are displayed on the map, regardless of whether you do it at full opaque or half transparency, doesn't make it immediately obvious what is remaining to do versus what are the things that you have marked off. And so I think that's something that could just be visually improved so that it was easier to parse the map at a glance. I talked about first quest versus second quest having different locations. There's also mixed quest, where you end up getting the union of all of the first quest locations and second quest locations. In Z Helper, when you are playing mixed quest, you click this mix button, and basically if it's second quest mixed, it takes the second quest map layout and then adds all of the first quest locations that aren't in second quest, which is basically what appears in mixed quest. And so I think like second quest like maybe has 77 possible locations and mixed quest has 93 locations, for example. And so there's like 15 extra locations that light up, or maybe I'm misremembering exactly what the numbers are. And similarly in first quest mixed looks like first quest, which looks like this, plus the second quest locations added in, which are these blinking highlights of the extra locations. And so on the one hand, it's very nice that you can just click these and discover the full set of locations that are available in Mixed Quest, all the places that you need to check off your checklist in order to find everything. On the other hand, it is weird that these extra locations have these extra blinking marks on them. It calls great attention to those locations here in Z Helper, and those locations are not necessarily more important. There is something that is kind of interesting about these locations, which are when you're playing Mixed Quest, it's the case that the locations that are only in Second Quest Mixed or only in First Quest, this set and this set, are less likely to have an entrance than all of the entrances that are in both, even when you're not in Mixed Quest. So for example, this screen and this screen and this screen are always not colored red, regardless of whether I'm in First Quest or Second Quest. And that means whether you're playing First Quest or Second Quest or Mixed Quest, there will always be an entrance to something on these locations. Whereas these blinking highlighted locations may or may not yield an entrance to something, because there's only a finite number of things that you can find in the map. And in Mixed Quest, there are more location screens than there are things that need to go in those locations. And so some of the locations will wind up empty. And so, for example, on this screen right here that's currently blinking yellow, you might try bombing that and there might not be an entrance there. And so you'll put the bomb on this particular screen and it will not open a secret entrance, simply because in this particular seed, this particular instance of the randomizer game, there happened to not be a location there. And instead, perhaps that location was moved here randomly. And so, yeah, it can be interesting to call out these sets of places. However, Z Helper calls them out very brightly by making them blink, and they also blink in the color of yellow for a spot that you bomb, blue for a spot that you would use the recorder, red for a spot that you push a block with the power bracelet, etc. So yeah, it calls out that they are different, but it calls out only the half of the different places that are particular to the opposite quest that you have clicked. And so first quest mix is showing the extra second quest spots. Second quest mixed is showing the extra first quest spots, but in game, they are essentially equal. And so this and this, both of these highlighted sets together, comprise the set of places that may or may not yield a location. So it's kind of a weird presentation that it's highlighting somewhat arbitrarily half of them as interesting spots when there's this other half that's equally interesting. And also, you can argue about whether or not they need to be kind of highlighted like this at all. So Z Helper It allows you to play these four different game modes: first quest, second quest, first quest mixed, and second quest mixed, which have their different kind of overworld characteristics, but it presents that information visually in a way that I think is kind of inconsistent and confusing. Finally, I've got a few of the icons up here. Let's actually take a look at the full list of Z-Helper overworld icons. If I go into the options menu and icons, um, I don't know why it is the case that so the various dungeon levels have the color of kind of like the brick wall and floor in the dungeons in vanilla, and so level 1 was blue and level 2 was dark blue and level 5 was green and level 8 is gray, kind of in just vanilla Zelda. So I can kind of understand that. There's also this dot next to them that's like blue and red and blue and red and light blue and red, that I don't know why those colors are there. So I'm not sure what that is for. Um, yeah, and in general, like just kind of like the colors of all the icons are kind of, they're not so bad kind of looking individually here, but then as you start marking up the full map, and especially the places that you X out, it's a very bright cyan color that I think stands out. And places that you have marked with an X are basically the don't care spots. It's the least important thing, and yet it's one of the brightest things on the screen as you're marking. And so I think that that's kind of like contradictory in terms of visual design. You want the things that are interesting and important to come back to be things that kind of like visually pop on the screen. And you want the things that you don't care about to kind of like fade away into the background. And so I don't feel like kind of like the way that the icons are colored helps do that. And there's also bits of either inconsistency or I just don't understand what the purpose is of some of the colors on the icons. And even the dungeon colors like just don't make much sense for randomizer, because it's typically the case that the actual dungeon colors in game are going to be randomized as well. The actual physical input gestures to mark up the map, I typically use scroll wheel when I was using Z Helper, and so you can scroll down or scroll up in order to go through all of the icons. It can take a little bit of time to do so, but you can easily find what you're looking for. You can also, rather than scroll wheel, you can left click. You can probably hear my mouse going, or right click to go the other way in order to cycle through the icons. So that's another way that you can potentially do it. Most people who are racing will set up hotkeys. I don't know that I have any hotkeys set up right now. I do have one for Sword 3, because I was just trying things out. And so if you have a hotkey, then you can just hover over a particular square on the world and press your hotkey in order to immediately mark something up like that. And so I just press 3 on my keyboard, which is the Sword 3 icon for the Magical Sword Cave. And so I think most of the people who race typically map a number of hotkeys, just because it's much quicker to press a button on your keyboard and do that than to scroll all the way down and accidentally overshoot and then come back and mark up where the Sword 3 cave is. So the hotkeys are good. The otherwise scrolling and clicking is reasonably intuitive. One thing that is a little bit weird is you'll notice like I just marked a bunch of different Sword 3 caves and a bunch of different level 1 locations. Dungeon 1 can only appear in one location on the map. The Magical Sword Cave can only appear in one location on the map, but there is nothing that prevents you from marking any square on the map with any particular tile. For example, even down here, there's never a location on this tile, but I can still mark it up with a dungeon location if I want to. And so whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think is a non-trivial judgment to call. There's value in consistency and just being able to mark every tile using the same gestures to get the same locations is reasonable. However, I have seen people make the error of finally finding Dungeon 5 in the Dead Woods and accidentally marking it as Dungeon 4 and starting the dungeon and having to leave, and then you try to come back 10 minutes later and you're like, where was Dungeon 5 again? And you look at your map and you don't find it because you accidentally marked 2 Dungeon 4s when you meant to mark this one Dungeon 5. And so basically there are classes of errors that the Z-Helper tracking mechanism admits, which include duplicate marks, as well as marking tiles that can never hold an actual entrance. And so maybe I marked, dungeon 3 here when I actually meant to mark it right there instead, and just was hovering over the wrong tile when I marked it. Or maybe I marked dungeon 4 when I'd already marked it and I'd meant to mark dungeon 5. And so one can imagine ruling out certain classes of errors by making it such that you can't place the same dungeon in 2 different locations at the same time, or making it so that you can't change one of these red hazy tiles that never actually has a location to mark a location because you probably were accidentally on the wrong tile and trying to do the one next to it or something like that. So those are possible improvements one could make to the input gestures of marking up the overworld map that would make things less error prone. And finally, with the dungeon UI, I've just gone up and marked some rooms in a dungeon like you might make a typical progression, having gone in a room over here, turned around, found a transport, walked up in here and found another room that maybe you can't complete yet. I find it just looks a little bit noisy. It's kind of hard to see everywhere I've been on the map and what remaining doors. For example, there's a door over here that I marked that I haven't taken yet, or what remaining walls that I haven't bombed yet. That might yield a location. For example, maybe there's a way to bomb this way or this way in order to find another room in the map, are not immediately kind of visible to me. It's also the case that the set of things that you can mark up, I guess actually let's go back to the icon list. The set of things that you can mark up, it's simple that it's just another scroll list of different things. But it can be a little bit incomplete in circumstances. For example, there's this icon that my mouse is on right here, which has Dig Dogger and Recorder. So Dig Dogger is a boss that you need the recorder to beat. And so if you don't have the recorder and you encounter this guy in the dungeon, you might want to mark him on this tile so that you'll be able to come back to him later when you can actually defeat him and get, whatever prize item might drop in that room, or get into the rest of the dungeon if there's a shutter door behind it. So that's a nice mark to be able to mark on the dungeon floor. But there's other things like there's a bomb icon for maybe you left a bomb pack on the floor that you want to come back to pick up later. Or there could be an item or transport staircase. That could be, both of those things could be in Dig Dogger's room. And so when you have to mark a room, you have to choose, do I mark it Dig Dogger? Do I mark it as a bomb pack? Do I mark it as a possible transport staircase? Which of these things are you going to do? And it is typically the case that the runner has short-term memory, and so picking one of them, typically like the boss icon, Dig Dogger, just kind of captures the salient information, and especially if it's something that you're able to come back to just a few minutes later, you can kind of remember in your head, kind of like the rest of it. Oh yeah, I remember there was a bomb pack in that Dig Dogger room that I could pick up later. Or I remember there might be a staircase in that room that I need to go investigate after I defeat Dig Dogger. Is information that you can remember, and so these marks are often relatively sufficient, but there are cases where they are not, because a particular dungeon room may have multiple independent aspects that are interesting to capture, and you can't capture them all at once inside Z-Helper. And so improving the ability to kind of like express certain things in the dungeon room could be another improvement that one could make on the tracker. So I think those are the things that I wanted to talk about Z-Helper. We've kind of given an overview of how it works, and in particular, I've talked about the features that I think don't work or don't work well as it comes to serving the various audiences, whether it be the player who's using the tool, stream viewers who are watching someone play the game, or someone who's new to the game and just trying to learn both the randomizer and the tracker tool itself. And all of these various little problems are the things that kind of motivated me to try to design and implement my own tracker. And so in a future video, I'll start talking about that. I hope, as always, you guys are having a great day, and I'll see you again soon.